Hi everyone, Holly from Safety Kids here, and I'm with my dear friend Catherine Knibbs from the UK, and I had the pleasure of meeting Cath 2 years ago when Roger and I were in the UK. We'd been messaging backwards and forwards for about a year, and then when we were there, we got to spend an amazing day with her. And I'm going to let Cath introduce herself, but she's my go-to person for cyber trauma. When I had a terrible incident, and we might talk about that later, where I was cyber traumatized, I went to Cath, and she knows so much in this field. So welcome, Cath.
Thank you for having me, Holly-Ann. I'm so excited to be talking to you.
And I'm really grateful because it's something that, we've got cyber experts up the wazoo here in Australia, but nobody's talking like you're talking. So I just wanted people that follow my page to learn from you, so that if their children are traumatized by whatever they see, they know how to deal with it. So what can you tell us about cyber trauma?
Okay. Well, let's start with what is cyber trauma. So I have an academic definition, which is very, very long. And essentially it talks about corporeal and virtual, which basically mean things that happen in the virtual world are the same as what we feel in the tangible real world. But essentially it's any trauma that a person experiences which is caused with, through or from any internet ready device. And that trauma can be now, it can be in the future, and it can be things from the past that are brought up retrospectively. So what we're talking about is the internet, and we're talking about that foreverness. Now, trauma in itself is, it's an interesting word, and it's context specific. So if I'm in the medical community, trauma would be something about the depth of a wound, or, the amount of blood loss, etc., etc. Whereas if we come across to my world in psychotherapy and psychology, you're looking at how a person experiences something, whether they felt overwhelmed and powerless, and what kind of sense they made of it. So trauma in itself is a large area, and it does get overused a little bit. I am saying that everything can be a trauma, but also we can have trauma that's really, really big in terms of earthquakes, COVID, and we can have smaller traumas which are name calling. But for that person, and it's always an individual experience, for that person, it's about what impact does it have? How long does that last? How do I make sense of it? What do I do in order to try and manage that issue? So cyber traumas are things, and there's a lot of overlap in the cyber world with terminology that can also be used in other areas. So for example, cyberbullying. And cyberbullying also includes cyber harassment, cyber stalking, hacking. So really, we've got this issue at the moment with language to try and explain what cyber trauma is. So I'm looking at a huge set of behaviours and impacts. So there we are.
Just a little thing then. So can you give us some examples of some of the young people that you've worked with, and the impacts that it's having on them? Because people that watch me know that I talk about pornography all the time, but it's not just pornography, is it? There are other things that can impact them.
No. So I think I did a handy guide actually on Amazon, which people can go and grab, in 2016, and I talked about little areas in terms of a page or two on a particular issue. So I can give you an example of a little 4-year-old boy that I worked with in therapy, and we were playing in the sand tray, and one of the things he kept doing was talking about these monsters and how they were scary. And it turns out that he'd been watching Call of Duty with his older brother, and his brother was playing the game Nazi Zombies. And this had absolutely terrified this little 4-year-old boy, because the graphics they're really, really good nowadays in terms of CGI. And this is going back quite a few years to the first Call of Duty, when that came out around about 2009. So it'll have been 2011, 2012, something like that. So, you know, I have been working in and around this area for a long time, and this was my first experience of seeing a child who was affected by a computer game. And since then, I've gone on to find examples of people having their pictures changed, doctored, what we now call memes. So in the early days, it was Photoshop. That was essentially what used to happen. And a young girl had her profile picture changed, and the people who had done this had created a pig out of her profile picture, and for her that was absolutely devastating. And you know, that was her cyber trauma. I've worked with adults who have been stalked, hacked, and the area that I'm in on my PhD is to do with what we now call online harms in the UK, and this includes viewing unsuitable material. I don't know who comes up with these definitions, but this is the one that's being used at the moment. But unsuitable material. So what we're talking about is 18+ rated material, really. So it does involve a lot of pornography, and pornography has a huge impact on children who are developmentally not mature enough to be viewing it. You know, even adults who watch some of this stuff are impacted by the sheer, let's call it, plethora of different types of pornography that exist. And obviously children have access to that.
Can you just explain for people about the brain, do a bit of brain stuff with people, and talk about how, I know we've talked extensively about how our brains are wired for novelty and stuff like that. So can you talk to people about that?
Yeah, so I think if any parents have done any reading around this, what generally comes up is this one phrase that it drives me to anger very quickly, actually, is this dopamine hit, because we are much more complicated than this one particular neurotransmitter. But what I will do is I'll explain the brain as I do to my 5 and 6 year olds when they're in therapy. And the brain is a little bit like a house. We have an upstairs and a downstairs, and the downstairs part of the brain is fairly primitive. It's the part that we have, through evolution, gained from mammals. So if you think about mammals, they don't talk, they behave in particular ways, and they have two ways of dealing with the world. They either run away or they run towards. So what this part of the brain does is it's involved in seeking out, mating, feeding, looking after drives such as hunger, sleeping, breathing, movement. So it's fairly primitive. And then we have another area on top that's slightly more advanced, and that's about being in packs and being in groups, and that's about safety and relationships and emotions. And then we have the upstairs part of the brain. Now this is the part of the brain that we're all using right now, which is the part that's we call cognitive, and pretty much the front of the brain is involved in planning, reasoning, thinking, you know, what are the consequences of my behavior if I do X, Y, Z? And generally, when we are encountering new and novel stuff, both parts of the brain that are working to try and understand what it is that we're engaging in the world. And I am trying to keep this really, really simple. And usually we are driven to make connections. We are driven to seek out new and novel things, because that's what our brain likes to do, and that's how we learn. And we are social creatures. So this is why we seek out those new and novel relationships generally. So when somebody encounters a trauma on the internet, or when they stumble across a website that perhaps they've not seen before, the upstairs part of the brain goes, ooh, this could be really interesting. This could be something that could help me survive. It could be something that can help me now create a new way to have conversations. And generally, if we're thinking about the pornography sites here, what usually happens at that point in time is the brain gets a little bit stuck. And what happens is the new and novel information is coming in, and it's exciting, it's scary. So we've got a run away and a run toward. Ooh, I'm interested in what I'm watching, but at the same time, I don't know what it is, so I need to run away. And when we take that into theories about humans, when we have this run toward and run away at the same time, we become quite frozen. And it's often called unresolved trauma or disorganized attachment. There's lots of different ways of describing it, but basically we get stuck in the moment. And the way that the brain works is it pays attention to things that could be dangerous. That's the primary function of the downstairs part of the brain, is pay attention to the things that could kill you. So what happens in that stuck moment is you stare and you take in all of the information. And then that information is retained, and we call this a memory. And at that point, that memory then becomes something that we will refocus on. Do you remember that time when? Yeah, so this is why children can really, really be affected much, much more than adults, because they are sponges all the way up until the age of about 25, until the brain fully matures. So everything about life needs to be focused on, because it could be dangerous and it could be that tiger that could kill you. So in effect, the brain is set up to pay attention to this kind of material. So that is essentially what happens in the brain when we encounter something that's, that could be scary, that could be interesting, that could be frightening. And all of us will have an experience of this the first time we ever watched that scary movie that we were told not to watch, that we did it perhaps through hands, behind a cushion, that there's something about we are drawn to watch something that is really terrifying.
And, you know, thank you for nailing it, because when we spoke after I had my experience where somebody, for those people who don't know, about 2.5 months ago, I was tagged into some child exploitation material. Now, I talk to children about this all the time. And, you know, I'm not a child. And even as an adult, you know, I knew to take a screenshot of the person's face, but not what was happening to the children. And also, you know, so I was aware, but, you know, you asked me, Holly, what did you do? And, you know, I know to turn away or, you know, shut it off, but I still went back because I gone, that couldn't be right. So I went back and watched it a second time. And, and that's why, you know, as traumatizing as it was for me, and I'm still getting flashbacks about it, but I see it as a blessing, because when I went up into the house and said to Roger what had happened, I think I'm quite articulate, and I said to him, you know, I saw this through tears, and he's gone, oh yeah, like, big deal. And so he doesn't understand still why I might spontaneously burst into tears. And so, you know, I used to tell children to turn it over and then go and tell an adult. But I now say go and show the adult. The adult needs to see what the child has seen, because, you know, if I can't articulate enough to my husband, then how is a child supposed to tell a parent exactly what they saw? And how is a parent supposed to, and I was talking to a counsellor earlier today who was telling me how she was just counselling a child what she thought was having sleeping problems. But when she got to the root of the problem, it was this 8-year-old had seen pornography and was too scared to close her eyes at night because that picture kept popping back into her mind.
Yeah. So people might have heard of something called PTSD. So it's often, again, I don't like the D on the end of it because it's not a disorder. It's an absolutely appropriate reaction to seeing something that was frightening. But the D tends to be used for people who are, let's say, in those air quotes, not getting over their trauma, which is, you know, why would you? Trauma is trauma. There is this thing about PTSD within so we've got a couple of manuals where we diagnose people, and one of them's called the DSM. And within that statistical manual, it explains exactly what PTSD is, and that involves intrusive images. And of course, the way that the brain works, if any of you have ever tried to do meditation, or you've ever tried to go to sleep when you're feeling anxious, your brain just does not do what you want it to do in that sense. Okay, so the brain is also set up to constantly monitor what's going on in the body and the environment. And in order to do that, so that you can survive, it also runs the program of what happened today, what could happen tomorrow? What do I need to do to make sure I'm safe in this, and this situation? So we call that rumination. And you have absolutely no control over what thought comes next within your brain, okay? Which is really hard for people to sometimes get their head around. If I say the word London, none of you will be able to predict what I say next, because I don't know what's going to pop up next. And the word cherry just popped up. And because of the conversations that we've had before, I'm probably going to go with purple, because I know that's the colour of your favourite colour. It's also safe for kids. And we could actually follow our thought pattern and I sometimes get my clients to do this actually, just to show them how the brain works, that you have no control over where your mind goes to. So you can be busy during the day and, I don't know, say you go to open the cupboard. Well, your brain spends every part of the day trying to keep you safe. So you're just about to open the cupboard and your brain goes, oh, this could be dangerous. There's cups in there. And what happens if one of the cups is on the edge of the shelf? Yeah, do you remember that time that you saw that image on TV that was really scary? And it associates fear with anything and everything that we're doing.
Wow.
And it almost happens out of, well, it does happen out of our awareness. So this image suddenly comes to the front of your mind, and it has nothing to do with what you're doing at the moment, but in your brain system it does, because it's going, oh, this could be dangerous. That hairbrush that you're about to pick up, what happens if, and if we spent all day long listening to that part of our brain that's trying to keep us safe, we wouldn't move off the settee, because we'd be frightened that we might break our ankle or trip over something, and the coffee table that's in the way and the doorway, and so we kind of shut that part off. But sometimes it's a little bit loud, and that's what we call an intrusive memory. So in PTS, which is the post-traumatic symptoms, one of these symptoms is intrusive images when you are least expecting it. And the best way to see images is when your eyes are closed. So you can imagine, for that little girl that you were talking about, that's what she was trying to avoid. So given that silence and work going within, if you like, when you close your eyes, she will have been experiencing fear every time her eyes closed. And how does she explain that to somebody? It's about the image that I see every time I engage in this process, which I know is good for me, but I'm very, very frightened of it. So sleep becomes the issue. Yeah.
I mean, again, a while back I was really badly cyberbullied. It was quite early in Safe Kids days, and for 3 months, every time I opened up my laptop, I felt sick. I had my early warning signs. And, still to this day, the first thing I do in the morning is reach over, pick up my phone to check. And Roger's gone, oh, you're not a 13-year-old girl, Holly, put your phone down. But he doesn't realise. But it took a good 3 months before I had those physical sensations of feeling sick go away. And so again, my brain's fully formed. I just can't imagine what it's like for children, whether it's cyberbullying, whether it's, whatever it is, because, our body gives us those physical responses to keep us safe.
Yes. So, again, I will try and keep this very, very simple. There is a theory called polyvagal theory, and it's my favourite theory because it kind of ties the brain and the body together. Now, what happens in this system is it's a set of pathways that go up to the brain, and they carry information about how safe your world is. That's it in a nutshell, okay? So the pathways are broken into above and below the diaphragm, and we call it the vagus nerve. So you might hear people talking about the vagus nerve. It's becoming quite popular now. And the lower vagus nerve is the one that is very, very, very primitive. And it's the one that we pay attention to because it connects your gut. And this is where we get those phrases, gut instinct and intuition. Yeah, I just knew deep down these kind of phrases. We've been talking this as human beings for a long, long time. We just didn't connect it to the science. So those early warning signals are, I call them uh-oh feelings. And that uh-oh feeling can often go up to the brain because of something within the environment, but the brain is an associative system. And like before, if that young girl or you were waking up in the morning, the uh-oh feeling is the first thing that you notice. So of course you pay attention to it, because again, the brain is absolutely geared for survival. So it pays attention to those feelings immediately. And then what happens is, obviously you now associate it with that thing that you're going to pick up. We call that the smartphone. And now you've got an association of this feeling, that thing every morning. So the next morning you wake up, your tummy goes, oh, it's the morning. Uh-oh. Now you've got the uh-oh again, and it almost becomes more and more and more ingrained. And it does take quite a lot of this cognitive thinking to rationalize your way out of it. And for young children, they don't even have that part of their brain, let's call it working online at that point in time, because that's not quite how children's brains mature. So they're not able to work through it in the same way that adults are. So essentially 7 and under, they process images, information in one particular way. 7 to 12 is starting to understand the world in a bit more of a sense-making, kind of consequences, actions, impact, that's that kind of thinking. And then 12 upwards is where critical thinking really begins. So under the age of 12, we are working, you know, and what will be happening for the parents and people paying attention to this, Holly, is under 12, those children do not have the language, they don't have the skill set, they haven't matured enough to be able to make sense of it in a way that we can as adults. And that's sometimes why adults will say things like, well, it's not really a big deal, because when you can critically think, it isn't a big deal. But under 12, when you can't, it is a big deal.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm glad you mentioned that, because, you know, even back to teenagers, when they're being cyberbullied, you know, if I had $1 for every time a parent says, well, they shouldn't just go, why do they go on there? You know, people don't understand that, you know, because as adults, we see, well, you don't because you work in this field, but most of us see the real world and cyberspace. But for children who've never grown up without, you know, the cyberspace being around, it's all one space. So can you talk a bit about that to help parents get their head around why they can't just put it down?
Yes, so there's a couple of things there about, actually I did a piece of research which unfortunately it's what they call paywalled, and it's in a journal called the Journal of Technoethics over in the US. So, you know, it's not going to be mainstream research, but in that piece of research I talked about interviewing counsellors and what they found with cyberbullying. And the most common theme that came out of the research was counsellors were becoming e-safety advisors. So I spoke with some that understood the tangible world of cyberspace and those that didn't. And what came out was that there's basically two types of people at the moment: those who understand cyberspace and those who don't. Those who think you can just turn it off, and those who don't understand that that's not even possible, because even if you close the lid, cyberspace is still there. It's like the bully at school. Even when you come home, the bully still lives in their house and they're going to be at the school in the morning. However, this foreverness means that it kind of increases that availability. But for me, there's also something about what I find more often than not is that we do have this turn it off. It's not a big deal. Why don't you just ignore them? Click off it. In fact, I've actually seen something this morning that was talking about another trend. And the advice given out by this e-safety person from America is just ignore spam messages. And I thought, well, then you don't understand how the brain works, because we can't do that. We're drawn to read something. We're drawn to read something that might be about us, because again, it's about the survival aspect. So, you know, for children that are being cyberbullied, and it's interesting, it's not just children, because like you, I was what I call backdoor bullied by somebody who actually advertises themselves in a very public social media forum as the cyberbullying expert of the world, if you like. And I questioned and asked for some of the research that, so basically this lady was saying, this is what kids experience, this is how they experience it. And I asked in a public forum for some of the statistics or research. I'm a critical thinker. I want to see the evidence. And she basically removed my comments, sent me a private message saying, I am the evidence, I don't need you to trash my post, blah, 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 and then talked about me on Twitter. So there was this real interesting, and I thought, how interesting, I've just been backdoor bullied by somebody who claims they understand cyberbullying, and how ironic. So, you know, this, it is pernicious, cyberbullying, and the idea of what cyberbullying actually is as well becomes that grey area. So, you know, when I'm kind of trying to talk about this issue, there's lots of ways young people can be cyberbullied. But also it's something that as a parent, when a young person comes to you and says, you know, this is what's happening for me, we might see it as a thinking adult in a very different way to a younger person, and it's about that compassion and empathy of, so tell me about it, tell me how this has affected you, tell me what it is that you find very difficult, and let's have a look at a way that we can deal with it. Can we report it? Can we now protect you in some way, shape or form? And this is where fantastic e-safety websites come in. You know, go and find out how you can report and block, you know, because we are in a world where it is possible to be cyberbullied in so many different ways, that it's about how do we give children the tools to manage it themselves, but also be that compassionate ear, because that's the bit that the children need more than being able to block on a platform.
And to be honest, I hate the term cyberbullying, because again, adults go back. I mean, I was terribly bullied at school, but I got to go home at 3 o'clock and it ended until I was back at school at 8:30 the next day. And parents don't realize it's 24/7. And so, you know, that they tend to, cyberbullying, and they tend to play it down. And like you said, because kids' brains aren't fully formed and all of that stuff, you know, cyber abuse would be a better term, or cyber something else. But I just think bullying, to be honest, because, you know, we've had far too many children die by suicide because of it. Mm-hmm. You know, this is what's impacting our kids. So it's not just, you know, the old teasing or whatever. I think we need to choose our language better.
And this is particularly why I focus on the cyber trauma, because one of the so I'll give you another slant on this, is the difference between bullying, which is intentional. So I've reframed cyberbullying in this piece of research, because bullying tends to have a definition that talks about it's intentional, it's a power dynamic, it's repeated, etc., etc., etc. But what I know from trauma as a therapist is a one-time event is traumatic. Therefore, a person can feel like a victim from a one-time event. And secondly, it can be without a power dynamic, because the thing about cyberbullying is it can happen via, you know, we've got not Autobots, that's made Transformers, but we've got bots now that auto reply to things, and somebody can feel that they've been bullied or they've taken offence, and that still would fit the definition of bullying. So for me, what happens at the moment, particularly in the UK, is we've got a number of definitions about bullying, and it being an intentional repeated act. And I'm saying it is different for cyberbullying, particularly if you receive, I don't know, a critical email from somebody. You know, well, these are the haters that come on social media, you know, or trolls. Here we are again. Now we're moving into another kind of territory and another word that it's trolling. It's not cyberbullying, and it's flaming. It's so this is the problem with the language. But cyberbullying is a one-time event, and all the person needs to feel is victimized in some way, shape or form, or got at. So I kind of forgotten where I'm going on this one now, but the cyberbullying, I think if we talk about it, about being cyber traumatized or it's probably got a bit more of weight to it. But we've also got terminology like online harms, cyber abuse, cyber harassment, and, you know, each one has its own definition and its own merit with that definition. But for me, there's something about it. It is 24/7. These young people are always on, and I think, to go back to something you said a minute ago, that there's there's a way that I describe this to parents about, we don't, and again, this is about terminology that gets used in 2020. So I would be classified as a digital immigrant. Yeah. So I mean, what a horrible term. But I'm not. I'm a digital native because I have grown up with this technology since I was about 8 or 9, and I've used this technology in my life every single day. So I am of the same ilk as a lot of the young people who are born into technology. And one of the differences for me is I don't say to people, wow, look at you, kitchen native, look at you, kettle native. It's absolutely idiotic to start using this terminology when this technology is a tool and a medium. Okay, so it's a tool. If I need to do a calculation, I pick up a calculator. Well, now we're in 2020, I can pick up my smartphone to do it. But this is where we get, all of the, again, another term, screen time. It's a nonsense term. The idea of picking something up to use as a tool is a tool. But if I'm picking it up to socialize, to talk to my friends, then I'm using it as a medium. So what I'm finding is we've got all of these terms that are absolute nonsense. It's just, I think academics are coming up with, it's mainstream media more than academics. We come up with these terms so that we can demonize and penalize and, kind of pathologize. But yet we don't use those kind of terminologies about driving a car, using a hairdryer, using a kettle. It's for me, there's just something about, I don't know what we're doing as a species, making up all these words, but it's now becoming something that we can use in a derogatory term. But there is something about, I am of the generation that used to use dial-up. You have to plug it into the wall and it took ages. And so I was there when the internet began. And I'm now at the stage where I understand there is no getting away from this other world. It's like saying to people, well, just switch off life. The only way you can switch off life is by going to sleep. So it's really difficult for parents to understand because they call it online. And again, when we first started with the internet, that's exactly what it was, is you had to plug in physically to go online. And now online exists because Elon Musk, he's just sent up, I think we're currently going to have 660 satellites that will beam Wi-Fi around the planet. We're not even going to get into the eco-suicide of that particular issue in terms of for the planet.
Whole another series.
But there is also something about that now means that more people can be online at all times. And what that does is that increases your susceptibility, your vulnerability, but it doesn't half increase your availability. And that's the difference that people of my generation that get called the digital immigrants don't quite understand. And for younger people, they're growing up in a world where this technology is like the TV, the kettle, that they don't know how not to be online, if that makes sense.
Well, from what I hear, most kids are actually online rather than watching TV. More kids watch YouTube than watching TV. So Cath, before we go, because, I'm all about trying to empower parents and have conversations, what's some really good advice that you can leave the parents to, if their child is having trouble sleeping, or what great advice can you give parents basically
So compassion and empathy are skills that can be learned, but we are all driven to be compassionate and empathic. Yeah. Now, when we bring children into the world, we want to ensure that they don't get hurt, that we look after them. That is generally a biological drive within, most people, I hope. So what I would say is the way that we communicate that to children is we do what Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson called show up for your children. Be curious, but not nosy. There's a difference. Yeah. So compassionate inquiry or compassionate curiosity is a way to say, so what are you doing online? Who do you talk to? What's that game that you're playing? Oh, how do you do that? How do you get to the next level? And allow so meet these children where they are, allow them to educate you in their world, because the digital world is fascinating. It's so positive. yes, there are negatives, and obviously my research and my work is to talk about the negatives, but the positives are, wow. That, you know, if I think about the games I play, the fact I get to talk to you on the other side of the world, we've had a lockdown in a time when we haven't been completely isolated. We have had technology that allows us to be with other people. So for these parents, it's taken interest. I know it's boring when they're talking about Minecraft and they're talking about the village and they've got 400 pigs and they're going to build this and will you just watch them while they mine the next brick? I get that that can be boring. And, you know, it's a bit like going and watching a football match or going and watching a rugby match. You will find there are parents that stand and chit chat to each other. Yeah. Those that don't want to do it, those that don't want to be there, you know, and those that are enthusiastic. If your child feels that you are enthusiastic, curious, compassionate about what they're doing, they are going to communicate with you about everything. And this is kind of what I'm trying to encourage a lot of parents to do, is not be what we now call helicopter parents, or you know, I might start calling it tractor parents, the ones that barge in, but be curious, ask questions, communicate, be interested. And if you're not interested, pretend to be interested so that your child thinks that you are.
You make it.
Yeah. And you know, I get it. Not everybody is a geek like me and wants to know, you know, what the latest trend on, you know, some of the forums are, that want to know why something's happening. So at the moment I'm watching he's 22. Okay. So this is, I haven't got littlies anymore. My 22-year-old was playing The Witcher the other day, and there was a card game that came up. And before I knew it, I was asking questions about, well, how does this game work? Because I'm of, you know, the board game era of again, curiosity and geekness. I wanted to know what this game was. I'd never seen, and I couldn't make sense of the rules. So he sat and he explained this game to me, and I still don't understand it. And I've asked twice now. So, you know, that's my learning curve, to go off and learn this new card game, which is a variant on the Pokemon trading cards,
Okay.
which is a variant on the stickers that we used to collect when we were children for those magazines, either, you know, the football magazine, well, it's showing my kind of interest there, football magazines, or I don't know, Star Wars magazines,
And the old
whatever.
baseball cards from my era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is all it is instead of physically trading stuff nowadays, or having that kind of communication, children do it online. So do adults. But that's what we're doing. We're trading our information online. So what I'm kind of saying to you here is, get the parents to do it in the real world. Trade me your information and I'll tell you something about what I think about that. And that, you know, we are storytellers. I'm a story seeker as well as a storyteller. But this is the way to encourage communication. This is how we evolve as a species, is by telling stories, which is what we're doing now.
Exactly. Look, Cath, I'm really glad that you said that, because here just this week, our E-Safety Commission released a study that said 1 in 5 children in Australia is a free-for-all. They just go online, nobody knows what they're doing. And, you know, I'm all about, whenever I train parents, you know, open communication. You know, if you're too busy to listen to your child's little story, then they think they can't tell you the big things either. So,
Mm-hmm.
Matt, we have to make time for children. And I know everybody's busy, but, you know, we need connections, because if children don't have connections, there are people out there that are going to want to connect with those kids.
Yes.
And that's a whole nother conversation that we'll have another day.
Yes. I mean, for me, I think it's in the handy guide. That the chasm that exists at the minute is because parents expected teachers and schools to educate their children around the online world because they didn't know enough, and the schools vice versa thought parents were doing it. And, you know, those people who are perpetrators of child crimes are in the middle going, I know they're not being taught it. We will make our business exist here.
Yeah. Happy
And,
days.
and that is the worst kind of trauma that I deal with mostly in my practice.
Yeah. Well, and you've also got a podcast and a YouTube channel. So I will get, if you don't mind, sending me the link to that Amazon book that you have. And I'll put all those in the either the notes or below or above or wherever. I'll put them in the notes somewhere.
I do. I know I do that, and I go, I think they're below.
Because, you know, we've done a interview on your podcast and stuff like that, but you've interviewed amazing people. So hopefully people got a value out of this and will want to go on and follow your podcast and your YouTube channel and stuff like that. So is there any last things that you'd like to leave people with?
I would say actually it's one of the most downloaded episodes is the one that we did. Yeah. So it's, you know, the YouTube channel itself is a little bit disorganized. I'm still in the process of organizing it so that I can have cyber related stuff, because right now I'm actually talking with people where we're talking about health and well-being and so on as well. So, you know, it's called Cyber Synapse because it was about creating connections. And, you know, that's what's in the brain of these synapses. We have social synapses, and, you know, technology's allowed me to have more people that I can talk to around the world that I would never have been able to do that with. So I kind of came up with this terminology for the podcast, and yeah, it's going to get a rebrand soon as well. So,
oh, am I beating Gary Wilson? Because I know we were neck and neck.
Yes, on the downloads, yeah. So, funnily enough, the two that have got the highest downloads at the moment are the conversation I had with you and another one about psychosexual work.
Wow. Look, Cath,
but that tells you what the adults are interested in as well, doesn't it? Because if you listen, and I will just recount it. It's because people can listen to an audio version of something with no history showing what they've listened to. So obviously they're going off and listening to the conversations that have involved sex, pornography.
Wow.
So it's no wonder children go looking.
Exactly. You know, and again, they're looking. Kids tell me that they go looking because we're not teaching it to them. And, you know, you're a bit younger than me, but I'm sure, you know, in the olden days, you know, I got out the old dictionary, everybody looked up sex. And nowadays, if they look up sex, they're not just going to see a few words.
They don't even have to look it up, Holly.
No.
What I will say is a lot of it is, and it's not the platform that I'm having a go at, it's the fact that this platform allows for this to happen. There's a platform called Discord, and Discord has most of the sharing of these files because it is a file sharing platform.
And with your consent, I will get you back on in a couple of weeks to actually talk more about your expertise around the gaming and all that sort of, you know, the Discord, because I remember us having a conversation about lollipop something. And
yeah.
So I think parents would really find that fascinating too. So thank you so much for giving up your morning. And yeah, let's keep talking.
You're welcome. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Holly. And, you know, anybody has any questions, you know, put them out to you, to me, and I'm happy to answer.
I'll put your link to your Facebook page in the notes. Thanks. See ya.
Thank you.